Tonight, as you close your eyes and allow your breath to slow, we'll walk together through a land once called Sumer, nestled in the fertile cradle between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This ancient region, known to us today as southern Mesopotamia, is where human history begins to take form not just as survival, but as society, law, art, and belief. Let the gentle sound of time passing carry you to the warm banks of these rivers, where reeds sway in the morning mist, and farmers in woolen tunics tend to irrigation canals carved by hand. The air is rich with the scent of damp earth and baked clay. Above, the sun rises over low mud-brick buildings, casting long shadows across ziggurats that stretch skyward like man-made mountains, monuments not of empire, but of spirit. The Sumerians lived over 5,000 years ago, yet their world feels startlingly familiar. They built urban centers like Ur, Uruk, and Lagash, each with bustling markets, temples, and neighborhoods. They crafted law codes, mathematics, and astronomy. They told tales of gods and kings, of floods and heroes' stories that would echo into the myths of later cultures, perhaps even into the pages of holy books and epics yet unwritten. But who were they, these first urbanites of Earth? They were not an empire, but a constellation of city-states, each governed by its own ensi or lugal priest-kings and warlords, whose powers rose and fell with the rains and the gods' favor. Their writing system, cuneiform, began as marks on clay tablets used to count sheep and grain, yet it soon bloomed into a language of poetry, prayer, and record. With styluses made of reed and tablets hardened by the sun, they captured the thoughts and worries of the ancient soul. Tonight, we won't simply study the Sumerians. We will walk among them. You will hear the murmur of merchants beneath reed canopies, the chants of temple priests in the early dawn, and the rhythmic splash of oars as boats glide across irrigation canals. You will see how a simple grain of barley led to the invention of writing, how the quest to track the stars birthed entire calendars, and how dreams of eternal kingship and divine favor wove a tapestry of religion, architecture, and myth. As we gently pass through these chapters, we'll explore the origins of the Sumerians and their arrival in Mesopotamia, the rise of the first cities with all their complexities and contradictions, the invention of writing, and the quiet birth of recorded human thought, the religious world of temples, gods, and rituals that connected heaven and earth, the politics and wars that shaped city-state rivalries and dynastic legacies, and finally, the legacy they left behind buried beneath sand, yet echoing in our alphabets, laws, and myths. We'll move slowly and deliberately, like the winding rivers they once worshipped, allowing each detail to settle like silt at the bottom of the mind. Along the way, terms will be explained gently, concepts unpacked with care. You are not expected to memorize, only to drift, to absorb, to feel yourself carried by the ancient winds. Imagine a time when each brick was laid by hand, when each field of barley required careful measurement, and when the line between the human and the divine was as thin as parchment. The Sumerians did not think of themselves as the first, but they were the ones who gave us time, numbers, writing, cities, and even the idea of history itself. So let go of today's noise. Let your thoughts be carried to those distant reed-lined shores. And as your eyes grow heavier, know that the past is not gone. It only sleeps beneath layers of earth, of memory, and of story. Now, let us begin. As we drift further into the stillness of deep time, our journey begins not in cities, but in villages, small, scattered communities that dot the fertile lowlands of ancient Mesopotamia. The word Mesopotamia means land between the rivers, and that is precisely where we find ourselves now, in the lush, silty floodplain between the Tigris and Euphrates. It is the 7th millennium BCE, and life here is rooted in the rhythms of the land. The rivers flood each year, renewing the soil, making it dark and rich. With simple wooden plows and flint tools, early people grow barley, emmer wheat, and flax. They herd goats and sheep, make pottery from the clay under their feet, and build homes of reeds and mudbrick. The people of this land don't yet call themselves Sumerians. That name, Sumer, or Kiengir in their own tongue, meaning land of the noble lords, will come later. But these early settlers lay the foundations for what is to come. By the 6th millennium BCE, settlements begin to grow larger. We find traces of early Neolithic cultures. The Ubaid period emerges, named after a site called Tel al-Ubaid. Here, the first signs of social organization and religious life appear. Communal storehouses, centralized temples, even irrigation systems managed by village elders. Life is no longer just survival. It is starting to become structured. These early people developed the use of canals, drawing water from the Euphrates to irrigate fields farther from the river's edge. With more food, population grows. With more people, society becomes more complex. Division of labor appears. Some make pottery, others farm, others still take on roles as spiritual leaders, craftsmen, or administrators. As centuries flow like rivers, small towns rise: Eridu, Ur, Lagash, and Nippur. Eridu, in particular, holds a special place in Sumerian tradition. It is considered by them the first city in the world. In myth, it is the home of Enki, the god of freshwater, wisdom, and creation. Archaeologists have uncovered layer upon layer of temples built atop one another at Eridu, each replacing the last, spanning over 1,000 years of sacred architecture. It is here we glimpse the emergence of organized religion and centralized authority. By the 5th millennium BCE, we enter what scholars call the Uruk period, named for the great city of Uruk, which will become the most influential urban center of its time. But even before Uruk's golden age, we begin to see something astonishing. Massive temple platforms, early signs of monumental architecture, and a hierarchical society that divides labor, wealth, and power. This is not simply a population growing, it is a civilization forming. But how did this transformation happen? It begins with surplus. Thanks to irrigation, agriculture becomes more productive. Villages can feed more people, including those who do not farm. This surplus allows for new professions: priests, scribes, craftsmen, and merchants. People specialize. Trade networks emerge. Goods flow in timber from the Zagros Mountains, copper from Oman, lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan. The Sumerians sit at the heart of a web of exchange. They are not alone in this land. To the north, the Akkadian speakers of a Semitic language also settle. But it is the Sumerians, speakers of a language isolate unlike any other known tongue, who will first shape this land into something recognizably urban. By 4000 BCE, pottery styles, architectural forms, and religious motifs become increasingly uniform across city-states, suggesting shared values, ideas, and rituals. The Sumerians begin to build with sun-dried mud brick, stacking them to create temples with raised platforms, the early predecessors of what will become the ziggurat. These temples, called esh or ziggurats, are the spiritual and economic heart of the city. They are storehouses for grain, workshops for crafts, centers for administration, and houses for the gods. Religion and governance are intertwined. To serve the gods is to organize the city. The gods themselves are reflections of natural forces. An, the sky father; Enlil, god of wind and air; Inanna, goddess of love and war; Enki, the wise water god. Each city becomes the home of a patron deity. To displease the god of your city is to bring disaster. To honor them is to ensure prosperity. The Sumerians see themselves as caretakers, humans created by the gods to maintain the divine order on earth. This belief will shape their laws, their rituals, and even their architecture. As we glide through this ancient world, let us pause at a typical early Sumerian village. The houses are made of woven reed and mudbrick, their rooftops flat and walkable. Inside, simple tools of flint, bone, and copper hang from the walls. Families sleep on woven mats. Outside, goats bleat, dogs bark, and children play near irrigation ditches. The temple rises in the distance, a stepped platform of packed earth and clay, its top crowned with a modest shrine. The priestess, tall and robed in dyed wool, walks slowly across the courtyard. She carries a basket of offerings, dates, grain, and incense. She will enter the temple, light the sacred flame, and pray for the floodwaters to arrive in season. This is not fantasy. These people lived. They spoke. They farmed. They feared. They hoped. And yet, we know them only through fragments, through the broken shards of pottery, the foundations of their buildings, and the future they unknowingly created. By 3500 BCE, the groundwork of urban civilization is fully in place. The wheel is in use. Carts roll along dusty roads. Pottery wheels spin. Temples grow larger. Social classes become more defined. From this complex, ever-organizing society, something quietly remarkable begins to emerge: writing. But writing, the great invention that will make history possible, is not born overnight. It grows, like the canals of Sumer, slowly and with purpose. Before we reach that moment, let us take one final breath in. This world of early origins, this world where humanity's greatest leap was not a weapon or a conquest, but a choice: to live together, to organize, to build something that lasts. As we leave behind the river villages and enter the rising cities, may your thoughts remain still, carried by the same ancient waters that once shaped the cradle of civilization. We now step gently into the age of cities and scripts. As the light of dawn spreads across the Mesopotamian plains, we awaken amid a new era, the age of city-states. The centuries have flowed steadily onward, and by around 3200 BCE, the cities of Sumer are no longer modest towns, but powerful, bustling centers of culture, trade, and sacred order. This is the Uruk period, named for the city of Uruk, which now rises like a crown above the southern horizon. Imagine it now, a city of nearly 50,000 inhabitants, sprawling over hundreds of acres, encircled by thick walls of clay brick. In a world where most people still live in villages, Uruk is something astonishing, a true metropolis. The skyline is dominated by grand temples, raised on artificial platforms, glowing under the midday sun. The air is filled with the hum of voices, the scent of cooked barley, and the sound of ox carts rumbling along wide avenues of packed earth. At the center of Uruk stands the Inanna district, the sanctuary of Inanna, goddess of love, war, and political power. The ziggurat here, though not yet in its most famous form, rises high above the rest of the city. It is the beating heart of both spiritual life and political control. City-states like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, and Nippur each develop their own identity, their own patron gods, and their own ruling institutions. These cities are politically independent, yet culturally interconnected. They share language, religion, technology, and even artistic styles, though they often compete fiercely for control of trade routes and fertile land. Each city is ruled by a Lugal, a Sumerian term meaning big man. The Lugal is part king, part general, part high priest. Sometimes the Lugal is elected in times of war. Other times, the position becomes hereditary. In many cases, the priesthood retains great power, managing the temples and the food surplus they store. And indeed, temples are not merely places of worship, they are economic centers. Within their thick walls, scribes tally grain rations, artisans craft offerings, and workers prepare goods for export. The temple controls herds of livestock, tracts of farmland, and teams of laborers. In this early economy, gods own property, and it is the priests and kings who manage it on their behalf. Here in this bustling economy, we encounter one of Sumer's greatest contributions to humanity: writing. Originally developed to track goods and administrative data, early writing begins as a series of pictographs carved into small clay tablets. A sheaf of barley is drawn as a simple stalk. A sheep is a curved line with dots for wool. These images are etched using a sharpened reed or stylus. Over time, the pictographs become more abstract, more stylized, until they evolve into cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script that will become the writing system of the entire ancient Near East. Cuneiform is not an alphabet. It is a complex system of logograms, symbols representing words, and phonetic signs. It begins with numbers and inventories, but by 2800 BCE, it includes names, verbs, even poetry. The earliest literature in the world begins here, in the quiet scratching of reed on clay. Writing transforms the Sumerian world. It allows for the creation of law codes, historical records, and contracts. It enables kings to proclaim their achievements and temples to standardize accounting. Knowledge can now be preserved, passed on, and replicated. The past becomes legible. Time becomes traceable. As we drift through these early centuries of recorded history, we witness the blooming of urban planning. The cities of Sumer are organized around central temples and palaces, with residential quarters, workshops, markets, and canals branching outward like veins. Streets are narrow and winding, shaded by the thick mud-brick walls of adjoining homes. Courtyards offer light and air. Wells provide water. Storage rooms hold dried fish, dates, and lentils. The houses are built from sun-dried mud-brick, the essential material of Sumerian architecture. With few trees and no stone nearby, the people of Sumer rely on the earth itself to raise their cities. Over generations, layers of mud-brick buildings accumulate, creating raised mounds known today as tells. Social structure becomes more defined. At the top are the priests, officials, and scribes, literate and powerful. Below them are craftsmen, farmers, merchants, and laborers. At the bottom, we find slaves, often prisoners of war or people indebted to the temple. This stratified society produces great art and refined craftsmanship. Cylinder seals small, carved stones rolled across clay bear exquisite scenes of myth, ritual, and daily life. Jewelry of gold and carnelian decorates the wealthy. Music is played on lyres and harps. Banquets are held in palace halls. The Sumerians drink beer, thick and hearty, through long straws from communal pots. Outside the cities, the land is carved by irrigation canals, lined with date palms and reeds. Farmers rise with the sun to tend their fields. They plow with oxen, plant barley by hand, and watch the skies for signs of drought or flood. Religion is ever present. Each action, from planting to building, is done in accordance with divine will. Omens are read in the flight of birds and the entrails of animals. Priests perform daily rituals to honor the gods, who are believed to live within the statues in the temples. Each city is a microcosm of the divine order, a sacred space that must be kept in harmony with the heavens. To fail in this duty is to invite disaster, famine, flood, or foreign invasion. And indeed, Sumer is not a land of peace. As city-states grow in power, they begin to wage war. Conflicts over water rights, grazing land, and trade erupt. Armies are formed. Bows, spears, and copper weapons are wielded. Fortifications are raised. Cities are besieged. Among the most powerful of these warring cities is Lagash. Around 2500 BCE, under a ruler named Eannatum, Lagash defeats its rival Umma in a bloody conflict over land rights. The victory is recorded on the Stele of the Vultures, one of the earliest known war monuments. Carved into stone, it shows soldiers in tight formation, trampling their enemies, a stark reminder that even in the dawn of civilization, conflict and power are never far from view. Yet even amid warfare, diplomacy and exchange continue. Treaties are written, Alliances are made, and as cities rise and fall, the cultural thread of Sumer remains unbroken. By the close of the 3rd millennium BCE, Sumer has become a land of urban innovation, literary tradition, and sacred rule. The achievements of this era writing, organized government, monumental architecture are passed along to future civilizations, the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and beyond. As we rest now in the cool shade of a Sumerian courtyard, let your thoughts settle. Listen to the distant sound of reed flutes and the soft bleating of sheep in the fields. Imagine the smell of baking barley bread, the warmth of sun on clay walls, and the calm wisdom of a scribe bent over his tablet. The city hums with quiet life. The gods are content. We have only just begun to understand the grandeur and fragility of Sumer. But soon, the first great empire will arrive, and with it, the winds of profound change. As we drift forward in time, the cities of Sumer are fully alive temples shining in the midday heat, streets echoing with the calls of merchants and children, and scribes hunched over their clay tablets, tracing knowledge into permanence. We now arrive at one of the most profound legacies of Sumerian civilization, the birth of writing, the formulation of law, and the flowering of the first literature in human history. The seeds of writing were planted, as we've seen, in the practical needs of temple economies. But as the centuries flow onward, the humble pictograms of barley and oxen begin to evolve, becoming more expressive, more abstract, and infinitely more powerful. This script is now known as cuneiform, from the Latin cunus, meaning wedge, named for the wedge-shaped impressions made by a reed stylus pressed into soft clay. The transformation begins with accounting. Temple administrators need to record how much grain is stored, how many sheep are owned, and what goods are owed in tribute. But writing soon spills beyond economics. It is adapted to name people, to record prayers, and eventually to tell stories. Over time, hundreds of signs are created, some representing whole words, others representing sounds or syllables. Young scribes spend years learning them, often beginning their training as children. In special tablet schools called adubas, meaning tablet houses, they copy lists of signs again and again. They memorize names of trees, animals, tools, and cities. They learn to compose letters, contracts, hymns, and eventually, tales of heroes and kings. Imagine now a scribe seated in the shade of a courtyard. The clay tablet before him is soft and damp. He dips his stylus in water, then begins. One mark at a time, he inscribes a tale passed down through generations. The words are silent, yet alive, a whisper from the past, preserved in hardened earth. Among the earliest forms of Sumerian literature are proverbs, hymns, and debate poems. These debates, known as disputations, feature objects or forces of nature arguing over their importance. The debate between winter and summer, for example, is a playful but thoughtful reflection on balance in the natural world. In these texts, we find the seeds of philosophy, cosmology, and even science presented through metaphor and myth. But it is in epic poetry that Sumerian literature reaches its most stirring height. One name echoes above all others: Gilgamesh. Though the version we know best is later Babylonian, the earliest tales of Gilgamesh originate here in Sumer. In the city of Uruk, he is remembered as a real king, perhaps ruling around 2700 BCE. But in literature, he becomes much more: a demigod, a restless seeker, a tragic hero. In the Sumerian stories, we meet Gilgamesh as a bold and flawed ruler. He defeats monsters, builds mighty walls, and embarks on journeys across the world and even into the underworld. His adventures are fragments at first, short tales told across different tablets, but together they form the foundation of the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest surviving epic. Within these tales, we encounter deep, timeless themes: the quest for immortality, the pain of loss, the limits of human power, and the inevitability of death. Consider this quiet line: spoken to Gilgamesh by the immortal flood survivor Utnapishtim. There is no permanence. Do we build a house to stand forever? Do we seal a contract for all time? Such lines remind us that even in the 3rd millennium BCE, humans are asking the same questions we ask today about purpose, legacy, and what it means to live well. As literature flourishes, so too does law. In the Sumerian world, justice is divine. The gods establish order in the cosmos, and it is the king's duty to reflect that order in human society. The earliest laws are recorded not just for governance, but for ritual to make justice a sacred act. One of the oldest known law codes is that of Ur-Nammu, king of Ur, around 2100 BCE. His laws are written in clear cuneiform and include rules about theft, marriage, injury, and inheritance. The punishments are structured fines, compensations, and in some cases, physical penalties. Here's an example. If a man knocks out the tooth of another man, he shall pay 2 shekels of silver. Unlike later codes that focus heavily on retribution, the laws of Ur-Nammu emphasize restoration and order. The idea is not just to punish, but to keep society in balance, to maintain what the Sumerians called the cosmic principles that govern the universe. The Mi, a term difficult to translate, are fundamental decrees of the gods, laws, arts, skills, and attributes that allow civilization to function. They include things like truth, wisdom, craftsmanship, and kingship. According to myth, the goddess Inanna once journeyed to steal the Mi from the god Enki, bringing them to her temple in Uruk, thus gifting humanity with the foundations of society. We must not overlook the role of religious texts in Sumerian writing. Hymns to the gods, prayers for protection, and rituals for healing are preserved in clay and sung by temple choirs. These songs are not simply artistic, they are acts of magic and devotion. In the temple, the spoken word is thought to shape reality. In fact, the spoken word, known in Sumerian as Nam Shub, holds incredible power. A Nam Shub is not just a statement, it is an utterance that changes the world. In myth, the god Enki uses a Nam Shub to confuse the languages of humanity, ending a time when all people spoke one tongue. This may be an early echo of the Tower of Babel story, recorded much later in biblical tradition. Language, then, is not merely a tool. It is divine energy, a bridge between gods and men. Meanwhile, scribes also write down economic contracts, marriage agreements, land sales, and court decisions, building a bureaucratic foundation for governance and civilization. In the cool darkness of the archives, rows upon rows of clay tablets are stored a dusty library of laws and life. They are catalogued, indexed, and preserved for future generations. And remarkably, some of these tablets survive to this very day. Thanks to modern archaeology, we can now hear voices that were silent for over 4,000 years. We can read the words of a student scrawling lines in frustration, or a father leaving property to his daughter, or a priest invoking a god to bring the rains. Every tablet is a whisper from the ancient world, a message in a bottle sent across the sea of time. As we recline now beneath the imagined stars of a Sumerian night, let your mind drift gently across the firmament of language and story. Imagine a young apprentice scribe, his eyes flickering in the lamplight as he copies the tale of Gilgamesh. The city sleeps around him. The reed pens are silent, but the words endure. And through those words, the memory of Sumer remains not as ruin, but as living thought. Let that thought carry you now into deeper sleep and deeper history. The soft glow of the Sumerian sunrise reveals a land transformed. In earlier centuries, each city-state stood alone, its walls shielding a proud and self-contained people worshipping its patron deity, ruled by its own Ensi or king-priest, writing its own history into clay. But as we now cross into the mid-3rd millennium BCE, those boundaries begin to blur. The city-states grow restless. The needs of empire stir in the soil. This is the age when ambition begins to stretch beyond the city walls, when the Sumerian world will both flourish and fracture under the weight of its own greatness. We begin with conflict. Sumerian kings had long waged limited wars over canals, pasture, and prestige. But now, warfare becomes systematic, expansive, and often devastating. As water becomes more precious and farmland more contested, city-states fight bitterly. Uruk clashes with Kish. Lagash battles Umma in a war that lasts over a century, a feud not just of armies, but of inscriptions, boasting, and sacred curses. In this growing instability, a figure rises from the north, not from Sumer, but from the Semitic-speaking Akkadian peoples of Mesopotamia's central plains. His name is Sargon of Akkad. Sargon, or Sharukin, meaning true king, is a name that echoes with revolutionary change. Around 2334 BCE, he overthrows the king of Kish, marches south, and brings the Sumerian cities under his control. For the first time in recorded history, the fragmented city-states of Sumer are unified beneath a single ruler, and empire is born. The Akkadian Empire, founded by Sargon, stretches from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. It is vast, diverse, and new. Sargon claims divine favor. He presents himself not merely as a conqueror, but as the chosen one of Ishtar, goddess of war and love. His inscriptions, now found across Mesopotamia, speak of military victories, grand irrigation works, and the establishment of a centralized capital, Agoge, or Akkad. Though the city of Akkad has never been found by archaeologists, its name lingers like a shadow in the annals of history. The Sumerians, now living under Akkadian rule, experience both continuity and change. Their language remains in use, especially in temples and religious texts. But Akkadian, a Semitic tongue, becomes the language of administration, diplomacy, and power. Cultural fusion follows. Sumerian deities are given Akkadian equivalents. The two languages are written side by side. Scribal schools begin teaching both a reflection of a new, bilingual world. This blending does not erase Sumer, rather, it spreads Sumerian influence even further. Under the Akkadian kings, Sumerian myths are copied, its gods honored, its artistic styles emulated. But empires, like rivers, are subject to drought and deluge. After Sargon, his grandson Naram-Sin ascends the throne. Naram-Sin is powerful, ambitious, and controversial. He declares himself a living god, the king of the four quarters of the world. On his famous victory stele, we see him wearing a horned crown, a divine symbol previously reserved for gods alone. This act, a mortal claiming divinity, shocks the religious order. For some, it is seen as hubris, and soon the Akkadian Empire begins to falter. Climate plays a cruel role. Around 2200 BCE, a period of severe drought and aridification begins across the Near East. Crops fail, cities are abandoned, trade routes collapse. The heart of Mesopotamia, so dependent on predictable rivers and rains, cannot withstand the prolonged change. Famine and unrest rise. In the vacuum, Gutian tribes from the Zagros Mountains sweep into Mesopotamia, toppling cities weakened by environmental and political chaos. The Gutians, poorly organized and viewed by Sumerians as uncivilized, cannot maintain order. Their reign is often described as a dark age, a time of disruption and despair. But from this chaos, the Sumerians rise once more. The city of Ur in the far south becomes a beacon of revival. Around 2100 BCE, under the leadership of Ur-Nammu and later Shulgi, a new era begins, often called the Ur-III period, or the Neo-Sumerian Renaissance. Ur becomes a center of learning, architecture, and law. The great ziggurat of Ur is built, a massive stepped temple rising high above the city, meant to reach the heavens and honor the moon god Nana. This period is not merely a return to old glories. It is a synthesis of Sumerian tradition and imperial administration. Ur-Nammu issues his famous law code, predating the code of Hammurabi by centuries. Shulgi standardizes weights and measures, reforms the calendar, and expands the scribal schools. The royal archives are filled with economic documents, hymns, and royal inscriptions, all meticulously organized. The bureaucracy of Ur is astonishing in scale. Thousands of tablets record every detail of temple donations, tax collections, land surveys, and labor rosters. Officials are assigned ranks, provinces are monitored. The empire becomes a machine of clay, administration, and ritual. And yet, this brilliance cannot last forever. By around 2000 BCE, the Ur-III dynasty collapses, once again weakened by internal divisions, nomadic invasions, and shifting trade routes. The city of Ur falls to the Elamites, an ancient people from the Iranian plateau. The dream of a unified Sumerian state ends, and with it, the final chapter of Sumer as a political power draws to a close. But not all is lost. Though Sumer's cities are conquered, its cultural legacy flows onward. The Akkadians, Babylonians, and later Assyrians preserve Sumerian language, literature, and law. Sumerian continues to be used in temples and scholarly texts for centuries, a sacred tongue, much like Latin in later Europe. The myths of Sumer become the myths of Mesopotamia. The god Enlil still rules the skies. Inanna still descends to the underworld. Gilgamesh still searches for eternal life. Even in death, Sumer endures. So as we float now through the quiet waters of time, past the shadows of Akkad and the ruins of Ur, we reflect not just on collapse, but on transformation. Empires rise and fall, kings conquer and are forgotten, but stories, language, and memory, these survive. And in those whispers of clay and starlight, Sumer still speaks. Let that whisper lull you now, deeper into sleep, and deeper still into the ancient heart of history. As we drift gently through the streets of a Sumerian city, perhaps Ur, or Eridu, or Nippur, we notice something above all else. The temple rises at the center. Towering over mudbrick homes, markets, and alleyways, it gleams in the morning sun, a great ziggurat, tiered like a mountain, stretching toward the heavens. This is no ordinary structure. It is a house of the gods. The Sumerians called their temples Ekur, meaning mountain house. In a land of flat plains, these man-made summits symbolized cosmic order, linking earth to sky, the human to the divine. And at the heart of Sumerian life was this divine connection. The Sumerians did not believe the gods were distant or abstract. The gods were present, powerful, and deeply involved in every aspect of existence. Each city belonged to a specific deity who governed its fate and prosperity. Ur had Nanna, the moon god, who lit the night sky and regulated time. Uruk had Inanna, goddess of love, war, and fertile chaos, fierce and radiant. Nippur was sacred to Enlil, the supreme god of wind and authority. Each deity had a great temple, maintained by priests, artisans, and workers. And these temples were more than religious centers, they were economic, political, and educational hubs. As we walk past the gates of one such temple, we smell burnt offerings, frankincense, and myrrh, brought from distant lands. We hear chants in the sacred tongue. We see scribes hunched over clay tablets, recording donations of grain and sheep, gifts of silver and lapis lazuli. The temple is both a sanctuary and a storehouse. Vast granaries surround its courtyards. Herds graze nearby, tended by temple servants. In its inner sanctum, only the high priest or priestess may enter to tend to the god's statue, bathe it, clothe it, and offer meals of bread, beer, and meat 3 times a day. To the Sumerians, the gods truly lived in these statues. They were not symbols, they were beings, given form and voice through ritual. And those rituals shaped all of life. Festivals filled the calendar. Lunar cycles guided the seasons. Omens were read in the stars and in the livers of sacrificed animals. Dreams were recorded, interpreted, and feared. Every act, planting a field, building a house, naming a child, required divine approval. Even kings needed the gods. When a new ruler took power, he often built or restored temples to gain legitimacy. Royal hymns proclaimed their piety, their dedication to the divine order known as me. These were the cosmic decrees, the fundamental laws that governed existence. Fertility, justice, wisdom, even sorrow. The goddess Inanna once descended to the underworld to retrieve the me stealing the building blocks of civilization from her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. In doing so, she brought culture to humanity, but also grief and struggle. This is the Sumerian worldview. Life is a gift and a burden, shaped by divine will and cosmic balance. Their gods are not always merciful. Enlil sends floods. Inanna wages war. The god Enki tricks and schemes. The pantheon mirrors human life full of contradictions, passions, and power. Yet within this divine drama lies a deep moral vision. The Sumerians believed in justice, enforced by kings and overseen by gods. Law codes like that of Ur-Nammu prescribe penalties for theft, assault, and fraud. Judges, scribes, and witnesses participate in formal trials, and oaths are taken in the name of the gods, not to be broken lightly. To break an oath, to violate a temple, or to steal from the gods, these were not just crimes, but cosmic disruptions. And what of the afterlife? Here the Sumerian vision is dimmer, more haunting. They believed that after death, the soul called the Giddim descended into the netherworld, a gloomy realm beneath the earth. It was not a place of punishment, but neither of joy. The dead ate dust and drank from puddles, unless the living remembered them with offerings and prayers. There was no salvation, only memory. And so the living sought to build monuments, leave inscriptions, and pass on names. To be remembered was to survive. To be forgotten was to vanish. This is why the great kings inscribed their deeds into stone, why temples recorded donations, why scribes copied hymns again and again. It was not just for history, it was for eternity. Even the myth of Gilgamesh, that most famous Sumerian tale, centers on this fear of death and the yearning for meaning. In the story, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, loses his friend Enkidu and sets out on a quest for immortality. He crosses seas, faces monsters, and meets Utnapishtim, the flood survivor the Sumerian Noah. But in the end, Gilgamesh fails. He returns home, wiser, sadder, and more human. His consolation? The great walls of Uruk, the civilization he built, the poems that bear his name. In Sumerian thought, the work of the hands, the song of the scribe, the justice of the king, these are what endure. And now, as we sit by a small Sumerian shrine beneath the stars, we reflect on this worldview. It is not one of eternal paradise, but of earthly beauty, divine presence, and the fragile hope of remembrance. A clay figurine, a whispered prayer, a name pressed into wet earth. These were the treasures of the Sumerian soul. So, as the night deepens, let us close our eyes to the flickering oil lamps and let their faith surround us. The gods have withdrawn to their heavens. The ziggurat stands quiet. The temple is still. Only the memory remains. And it is enough. As dawn breaks over the southern plains of Mesopotamia, the cities of the Sumerians lie still. Some are buried beneath layers of silt, others gently weathered by time, ziggurats reduced to mounds, canals dried into dust. The daily life of the Sumerians has vanished. And yet, their voice still whispers. Their legacy lives on not in monuments alone, but in the quiet infrastructure of our world. Let us drift now through this final chapter, tracing what remains. We begin with the most humble yet powerful tool, writing. It was the Sumerians who first gave humanity the means to record thought, to store memory outside the mind. Their invention of cuneiform, wedge-shaped script pressed into soft clay became the foundation for future civilizations. From accounting records to epic tales, from legal codes to star charts, writing allowed the Sumerians to expand the reach of the human mind. Today, every printed word, every keyboard stroke, echoes that first stylus pressed into clay. Next, we turn to their mathematics and timekeeping. The Sumerians worked with a sexagesimal system, a base 60 approach that still shapes our world. We divide an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds, thanks to their early reckoning. They measured land with precision, using geometry and early algebra to shape city grids and irrigation maps. They charted the stars and mapped the movement of planets, laying the groundwork for astronomy and calendars. Our modern week, with 7 days tied to the celestial bodies, may also trace back to ancient Mesopotamian rhythms. Now we pass through a courtroom and hear echoes of Sumerian law. The Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the earliest known legal codes, predates the more famous Hammurabi by centuries. It outlines punishments for theft, murder, and false accusations not through vengeance, but through measured justice. The idea that society must be governed by law, not mere force, is a seed planted by the Sumerians, one that grew into modern legal systems. Then we walk through the city itself. The Sumerians pioneered the model of urban life, a central temple, administrative buildings, homes for specialized workers, defensive walls, and a surrounding countryside of farms and canals. Cities like Uruk became sprawling hubs with tens of thousands of inhabitants. They gave us the concept of the city-state, a sovereign urban center with its own god economy and king. This model would shape Greece, Italy, and beyond. They taught us how to live together in complexity. And now we move toward the arts and stories. Their poetry, especially the Epic of Gilgamesh, shaped the themes that still define human storytelling. Friendship, loss, the search for meaning, the inevitability of death. Their myths inspired later traditions in Babylon, Assyria, Canaan, and perhaps even in early Hebrew and Greek texts. The tale of a great flood, for instance, as found in the story of Utnapishtim, may have echoed through millennia to become the story of Noah. And their sacred hymns, prayers, and temple rituals planted deep roots into the spiritual soil of the ancient world. The gods of Sumer-Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Nanna were adopted, renamed, and reimagined in Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian belief systems. Even the mighty gods of Olympus carry a distant echo of these earlier archetypes. In this way, the Sumerians became immortal not as individuals, but as a culture, a foundation. They were the first to ask some of the questions we still ask. What is a just society? How should we remember the dead? What lies beyond the stars? How can we live together? How can we write it all down? As we reflect on their legacy, it's worth remembering that the Sumerians never called themselves Sumerians. That is a name given by later peoples. They called themselves Ug-Sag-Gig-Ga, the black-headed people, and their language, Sumerian, is unlike any other. A linguistic isolate. A voice that does not descend from earlier tongues, nor give rise to modern ones. And yet, its echoes remain not in speech, but in structure. Their system of administration influenced the great empires that followed. Their irrigation methods laid the groundwork for agriculture across the Middle East. Their temples and myths were copied by scribes in Akkadian, Hittite, and Elamite script. And their sense of human limitation, of awe before the gods, of trying to capture time and soul in clay, remains perhaps their most enduring message. They knew that empires fall, that names fade, that cities return to dust, but still they built, still they wrote, still they dreamed. Even in their myths, humans could not escape death, but they could seek wisdom. As Gilgamesh is told, in the end, "Look upon the walls of Uruk, the work of the kings. These are the foundations. This is what endures." And so now we close this long and gentle journey, from reed huts beside the marshes to temples of painted brick, from kings in golden robes to scribes bent over clay, from divine laws to whispered lullabies. The Sumerians long gone still shape the rhythms of our time, the words we speak, the thoughts we dream. So let us rest now, beneath the stars of ancient Shuruppak, or in the silent ruins of Lagash. Let the stillness of history cradle you. Let the wind that once moved through temple courtyards now pass through your thoughts. And as you drift into sleep, know that you are part of a story that began in Sumer, with water and clay and the spark of memory. Good night.